Alright guys, so let's talk about Russia and the US dollar because Putin is taking his crusade against the dollar to the next level. By now we know Russia's frozen assets are as good as gone. They won't be integrated back into SWIFT either, and because of this, Russian reserves today are full of Chinese yuan and gold. During the St Petersburg conference, Putin basically ripped apart the US financial system. He exposed the truth. He is on a mission to de-dollarize the world.
И, конечно, Соединенные Штаты эксплуатируют свое монопольное положение на мировом финансовом рынке. На этой эксплуатации они серьезно зарабатывают. По данным, которые есть в открытом доступе, Соединенные Штаты, условно, задолжали мировой экономике 54,3 триллиона долларов.
He's referring to the privilege the dollar brings to the US. It allows them to borrow endlessly from the world to the tune of $54 trillion. And because of this borrowing, it vacuums away capital from the world. The US is flush with money while the world has a chronic shortage of dollars. And this causes currency crisis around the world. Japan is a perfect example of this tragedy. Because US bond yields are staying high, the yen has been collapsing hard for over 2 years now. And to save their currency, the Bank of Japan had to sell their US Treasury holdings. Japan sold $50 billion worth of US bonds, but here's the big problem. This is done at a loss. They likely took at least a 20% loss to raise money for their currency intervention. Their gains have been effectively wiped out. And because Biden keeps borrowing and spending money, he's putting pressure on currencies around the world. And that's how twisted the current system is today. Putin is reminding the world of this big vulnerability to the dollar system. As long as you hold dollar assets, there are many ways you can get screwed. And this goes beyond US sanctions or asset seizures.
The US economy is shrinking in size, and the foundation, the major pillars of the economy are no longer that strong. There are cracks on them. I'm not only talking about the state debt that is massive, but they're not always coping with the goals they set themselves in terms of inflation targeting. They have targets on inflation of 2%, but as we've seen it lately during the pandemic, they go well above 7.8%, which is undermining trust towards the US economy. Well, what is backing US economy if it is still shrinking? Well, there is nothing to back it, and this is a problem. Undoubtedly, this is a problem for all holders of US dollars and US money base and assets.
The problem here lies with how the US economy is shrinking in terms of global GDP, but the money supply is growing at such an astounding amount that there's nothing left to back the dollars except trust. From this chart, once upon a time, the US economy accounted for almost 40% of the world's economic output. However, it has dropped to just 26% today. In fact, the G7 share of global GDP is in decline, including the Eurozone, the UK, and Japan. But the dollar is still the reserve currency today. It accounts for the majority of global trade and central bank reserves. So the equation here isn't balanced at all. Inflation in the US will affect everyone globally. And if the US economy continues to stagnate, there'll be less and fewer real stuff to back the dollar's value. This is a very important point we can't overlook. The IMF has warned Congress against their endless deficit spending. They've warned them many times now. The US is simply exporting too many dollars to the world. There are not enough real goods like cars or tractors coming from America. And it's very alarming if we look at the numbers. In April this year, the US trade gap hit a crazy $74.6 billion. The trade deficit has grown by almost 9%. In other words, imports have grown much faster than exports. This reinforces what Putin is selling the world, that there's not enough real value being exported out of the US economy. They are consuming far more than what they produce. The power of the dollar rides completely on the world trusting the system. But the dollar's primacy will break sooner or later. It's just a matter of time. And Russia has pledged to make it happen in double time.
We are designing this work together, and the role of Russia in this regard can be quite meaningful. We have established the new development bank. We have established our own currency tools, and a large part of the participants of economic activity are switching over to settlement in national currencies. Take example of China. 90% of our trade is settled in renminbi and Russian rubles. If you look at the territory of post-Soviet countries, the share of Russian ruble is also getting close to 70%.
Putin has made it rather clear. BRICS will be building out new financial systems and more urgently, settling trade in local currencies. So we can expect more trade to bypass the dollar and the Western financial system, such as SWIFT. More blockchain alternatives will rise as well. Whether it's the digital yuan by China or the global Enbridge currency network by the BIS, new systems are being built as we speak. Even today, there's still a ton of feel-good articles from mainstream media, and it's all about how the dollar is untouchable, how the Chinese yuan is a joke, and how blockchain can never ever dethrone it. And in the short term, they might be right. The dollar system is still the hegemon of the world, and there isn't a single competitor that can replace it yet. But the US is sabotaging the reserve currency at a rather alarming rate, and this is pushing financial Armageddon closer every single day. And this brings us to the biggest fear countries truly have, that one day when I wake up, all my assets are frozen. And the US Congressman, a lawmaker, just confirmed this fear.
Did in Congress, we passed something called the Repo Act, where we said we're just going to seize all of Russia's sovereign assets in the United States. Well, it turns out a lot of that is treasury debt that they've agreed to buy so that they can hold dollars. And here's the problem with that. When people see that we've seized their money that they gave us in exchange for these treasury notes, then other countries won't want to buy our debt. It's already happening. And the price of a long-term bond that the Treasury puts out will go, it's already gone above 4%. It's like over 4.5%. And they don't want to buy them anymore because, you know, we probably wouldn't seize Great Britain's assets, but I could see us seizing China's assets.
Why would, I mean, that seems like theft. Just like take a country's assets. I mean, that belongs to the people of the country, right? It's not just Putin.
It is theft. Like, it's immoral, but even if you're okay with the amorality or immorality of it, it's short-sighted because eventually it'll catch up with us.
As you heard from Thomas Massie, even China is not off limits. Weaponizing the dollar was a big mistake. It invites more doubts about really holding dollar assets. And if you're not a G7 ally and you piss us off, there's always the chance of asset confiscation. A country's reserves are the savings of all the citizens. It's a national bank account after all. And a big shout out to our sponsor today, Indigo Precious Metals. When it comes to buying gold and silver, I trust Indigo Precious Metals in Singapore. They have made investing in precious metals safe, fast, easy and simple for both small and large scale buying. I've been stacking gold for over a decade now, and I've learned two things when buying. You want to buy authentic gold bullion, and you want to buy it at the lowest premium possible to stretch your dollars even further. And I'm glad to say I found both of this at Indigo Precious Metals. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world today. We have geopolitical chaos and the values of fiat currencies getting debased. Inflation is not gonna end, and that's why I consistently buy gold to preserve my wealth. Indigo Precious Metals is a leading retailer in Singapore. They specialize in physical gold, silver, and platinum. They are my one-stop shop when it comes to buying bullion. Their prices are sharp, and they have the best brands on sale, and I can test the gold on the spot. So if you're looking to make your first gold purchase, Indigo Precious Metals is the best place to start. Whether it's 1 ounce or 1 kilo, this is the reputable dealer you are looking for. So take action today. Click on the link below and enjoy a discount on your first purchase with the code SeanFu. Start your gold stacking journey today. But there's simply no reverse gear left. President Biden and Macron have reached an agreement on the use of Russia's frozen assets. This of course is a bridge too far, but as we said many times before, they will cross the Rubicon. The G7 simply can't afford to lose the war either. Everyone is waiting for this shoe to drop. It will be the death knell to the dollar as a reserve asset. It simply doesn't make sense anymore if your entire money, your stockpiles, can get confiscated. It's not a surprise that foreign investors are putting their money elsewhere. The foreign share of US Treasuries was over 50% a decade ago, and this has crashed down to nearly 30% today. This signals a collapse in trust that's only going to get worse. There's a reason why China is dumping dollars to buy assets. They are reducing their dependence on the reserve currency and buying commodities directly. Beijing is throwing more money into African countries. They are developing more oil and gas projects in the continent. They made over 60 investment decisions so far this year, and this includes Angola, Algeria, and Egypt. Instead of recycling their dollars into US bonds, Beijing is buying up resources around the world directly. And this unleashes a whole host of problems for the dollar and the US economy. US bonds are essentially a promise of future money to buy food and energy. You buy the bonds today because you believe the payout tomorrow is worth it, is bigger, that the returns will allow you to buy more food and gas. But if the US keeps debasing the currency and confiscating assets, that promise isn't exactly true anymore. You might as well take the dollars you earn and buy up the oil directly. And this means less demand for US debt, and government spending isn't going down, it's rising higher and higher.
Right now, we're able to finance it because we're the world's reserve currency.
Right.
And when we print more money, which we're doing all the time, the Fed is doing that, we're actually taxing the world. Everybody in the world who holds dollars gets like a 3% transaction fee. I say we're kind of like the credit card at the gas station that gets 3% because you're using that credit card.
Right.
Well, we get 3% from inflation we cause because the world is using our currency. And we can do that as long as they use our currency. But I think it's going to end at some point. They're going to quit using our dollars as reserve currency. I mean, I watched your interview with Putin, and one of the things, whether you hate him or not, one of the things he said that is true is when we sanctioned him, before we sanctioned Russia, 70% of their transactions were in US dollars. And after the sanctions, it's less than 20% of their transactions are in US dollars. So what we're doing with all these sanctions, ironically, we're shooting ourselves in the foot every time we sanction a country and say you can't use our currency to have a transaction. We're taking away our ability to charge them 3%.
The risks are simply enormous. As Massie said, the US will lose the ability to take 3% out of every transaction. They lose the ability to inflate the debt away without causing hyperinflation, which might actually be a good thing. There will be fewer wars and conflicts around the world. The US has no choice but to scale back on the sanctions and deficit spending, and that's the only way for the currency to survive long term. But until that happens, investors and countries will start investing their dollars elsewhere. They will invest in emerging economies, or they will simply invest in their own domestic companies. They will also buy much more gold. The world's gold reserves have been rising non-stop since 2020 after the US printed trillions to save their economy. Conversely, the amount of treasuries held by foreign countries has barely moved. It has been at the same level for the past decade, and this is happening when bond yields are rising. Countries are buying more gold instead of US bonds, and this is a signal that US inflation is much higher than 3 or 4%. Whatever the inflation number is, the world simply doesn't believe it anymore. It's critical we nail down who the big culprit is, who's generating all this inflation. It's not the man on the street, it's not the average American, it's not companies in the US either. Government spending is creating all the mess. And here's the reality. America's debt crisis isn't from households or businesses. Since 2008, the federal government has been taking on so much debt that it is nearly 120% of GDP. And the higher this climbs, the more it destroys the foundation of the dollar and the US economy as well. The future of currencies will be multipolar. Putin isn't going to stop. Congress is also making things worse with all these endless wars and money printing. Sooner or later, the world will face a reckoning. Do we keep subsidizing the US economy at our expense? And is the reward really worth the risk? More and more countries are beginning to say no. And that's why we have countries like Thailand and even Turkey looking to join BRICS. They want alternative systems and currencies. Despite the US dollar strengthening, it is losing market share of global forex reserves. In just 20 years, it has gone from 72% down to 56%. Countries are holding fewer dollars because bilateral trade is on the rise. Just in Russia alone, 40% of their total trade with the world is done in rubles. Commodities from oil and gas to metals and coal are being transacted in the local currency. And the more this continues, the worse it becomes for US bonds and the economy at large. China, India, and the rest of BRICS will increase their non dollar trade in the years to come. This is just the calm before the storm. But as always, let me know what you think. Is the dollar in serious trouble? And will the US really seize China's assets? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.